Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maria Gallucci. I'm a senior reporter for Canary Media. We're a nonprofit newsroom covering the energy transition. We're here today to talk about the data center energy race. So thanks, SOSV, for convening this panel. I'm joined today by Sean James, the Senior Director of Energy and Data Center Research at Microsoft, and Lucia Tian, the Head of Advanced Energy Technologies at Google. So we're going to get into understanding more how hyperscalers are working to balance this soaring energy demand for data centers with their climate commitments and also the kind of limitations on today's grid. So to kick us off, Sean, could you give us a high-level overview of why data centers are such big power users and what is it about them that makes them so energy intensive?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's good to be here with you both, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. That's the headline, right? Data centers use a lot of energy. Behind the scenes, what we've seen is actually a lot of energy efficiency. So I'll get into that in a minute. But basically, data centers are where we centralize all of the computers just make the whole compute system much more energy efficient. And since you centralize everything in one building, of course, there's going to be a lot more energy consumption. So number one, most of the energy consumption is going to the computers. And then secondly, some of the energy consumption is going to the cooling systems to keep those things cool. The interesting thing is the average computer has gotten just enormously energy efficient over the years. You kind of remember those old pictures of the giant computers where people are like plugging things into them, from 30, 40 years. If you were to measure like how much energy that thing takes to compute one thing, sort of like performance per watt, it's actually gotten enormously energy efficient today. I think our needs for computation have gone up so much. That's why there's just so much energy consumption going into compute.
Well, and I was curious to follow up on that. You're talking a lot about the energy efficiencies, how things have improved in that sense. When we see these projections for how much energy data centers might consume in the next 5 years, 10 years, it's off the charts, it seems like. So I'm curious for both of you what your take is on that, if there is reason to think that maybe it won't be so high or what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of $1 trillion question right now is how much adoption are we going to see with these new compute tools like machine learning, like AI, and others? Maybe quantum computing is around the corner as well. I think that's what everyone's trying to figure out is how much of a big deal is this going to be, right? And I think if you're in, Microsoft's shoes or Google's shoes, not to speak for you, but we need to be prepared because if there's a lot of adoption for this, then we need to power that compute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think honestly, this is a really challenging question right now, right? Because there's massive uncertainty, both on the demand side, as Sean mentioned, and in terms of actual power consumption, right? We're going to continue to see efficiencies at the algorithmic level, at the compute level, at the data center level. And we're also going to see, one of the things that I'm really excited about on the Google side is we're really piloting and pushing forward the ability for us to be flexible with our demand and see data centers as a potential grid asset. So a lot of things can change.
Thanks. Well, and Lucia, to follow up with you, Google obviously is working with advanced energy startups like Fervo, which is developing next generation geothermal in Utah and other states, and also with Kairos Power, which is right now the only U.S. company actively building a small modular nuclear reactor. So can you tell me more about kind of Google's work with those technologies and sort of the role they might play from a climate perspective as well?
Yeah, and also wanted to just say a big thank you for having us and for SOSV for hosting us here. We're getting into the space now that is the bread and butter of my team. I'm so glad to be here with Sean, who is a deep expert on the data center side. My team primarily works on the energy supply and the grid side. And you're right, we've pioneered a lot of innovative partnerships over the last couple of years with companies that are really on the cutting edge of bringing new advanced energy technologies to market. And maybe I'll start with the question of, why these technologies are important, right? I think in order to meet that rising electricity demand, and that's both from data centers, as we've talked about, but also more broadly on the grid, we're going to need a portfolio of energy solutions. And, on the Google side, we do our own internal modeling around this to see, what's the best and most effective way to meet our own business growth needs while meeting our clean energy goals. But it's also true on the broader grid, right? You've seen a lot of systems modelers do work around this. You need things like clean firm technologies like nuclear and geothermal, and you need things like long duration energy storage and clean peaking resources to actually create that clean and affordable and reliable grid of the future. And so, some of these earlier technologies are going to come at a premium today, but they're going to come down that cost curve. That's sort of the heart of what we're trying to unlock. And as a portfolio, they're going to be cheaper. So maybe onto that question of, what can electricity buyers, corporate electricity buyers like Google do to help? Our partnership with Fervo that you alluded to is a really good example of this, how we can be along on that journey to scale. Fervo, as I think many in the audience will know, is an enhanced geothermal company that's leveraging those advances in drilling technologies from traditional oil and gas sector to unlock better cost profile and lower resource risk associated with geothermal. And we've been talking to Fervo since they were an 8-person company. And then we did offtake from their first 3.5 megawatt pilot. Last year, we scaled up to 115 megawatts of offtake from their next project in Nevada. And here's where, we can play with a number of different tools in our toolkit, right? It's not just about offtake from that pilot. It's not just about, offtake can be challenging. We sometimes have to innovate also on the business side. So, in order to actually enable that offtake, for example, we had to work with our utility and the energy to create a whole new market construct that we call a clean transition tariff, or CTT, in order to effectively, bring that resource online faster, make sure that we're paying that cost premium associated with the new technology and insulating ratepayers from that. And then in exchange, we're getting all of the energy and capacity associated with that to use in our Nevada data center. So it's a combination of, working with many different players on the market to ultimately bring that technology to commercialization.
It's not as simple as just plugging it into the wall. It's very complicated.
Wait, Sean, could you talk a bit about what Microsoft is doing from the investing in technologies and startups and to kind of start addressing some of these energy challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So Microsoft, along with a lot of our colleagues in with the other hyperscalers, we're completely dedicated to decarbonizing compute, all 3 scopes. So when it comes to energy, really our priority is to help accelerate the commercialization and the scale up of not just carbon-free energy sources, but carbon-free baseload. The type of energy source that's carbon-free and can supply power all the time, not just when the sun's shining or the wind's blowing. And we're very excited about all of the carbon-free technologies. I completely agree with the sentiment that it's going to be a portfolio solution. But there's 2 things. So a data center is designed to actually run independent from the grid. And it's just all of the redundancy and backup generators, backup batteries that are built into the system to ensure that that data center is running even if there's a temporary power outage. Data centers connect to the grid because that's the most efficient and lowest cost way to power the data center. But there are a lot of on-site generating assets. And so what we're doing there, and this is the entire industry, is we're trying to figure out ways that we can replace diesel generators with something that's much more clean. There's things like new technology that's just now coming out of the labs and just now coming out of startups that are much more energy efficient, low emissions, in some cases like hydrogen or advanced energy storage. They're 0 emissions. Outside of the fence, it's things like nuclear. Microsoft just entered into a deal with Constellation to extend the life of it's the Crane Energy Center, formerly known as 3 Mile Island. This power plant that was running up until just a few years ago but was shut down because it was out of the money. That is probably one of the shorter term ways to get some of this carbon free baseload energy, is to just extend the life of the power plants that are the carbon free power plants that are out there. The new technologies like the small modular reactors, geothermal, even new energy storage, new batteries that can store energy while the sun's shining and the wind's blowing. And then when the sun goes away and the wind goes away, then the batteries can supply that energy. That's another way that you can firm up these renewable energies as well. So I think the future is, like I said, a portfolio of different ways that we're powering compute and data centers with carbon-free energy.
And when we're thinking about how to bring all of these resources online, the sort of portfolio of solutions online for baseload, for on-site generation, things like that, what are some of the biggest hurdles that you're both seeing to scaling these technologies up at the pace and the scale that's really needed to start addressing some of this growing energy demand?
Well, this is the current question, and it's all about scale, because a lot of times, we'll be working with a new technology company who's just struggling to kind of get out of the lab and get these products commercial and just get a few of them out there. And we're like, okay, it works great. When can we get like 1 million of them? Can we get 1 million of them in next year? And that's really a very challenging thing, to not just go through all of the engineering to get a product that's robust enough for mission critical environment like data centers. But now they need to shift gears and become experts in logistics and supply chain and material sourcing, building factories all over the world, and everything that's involved with that. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, working with trying to scale new technologies, is while our industry wants this type of tech, our demand is just going through the roof. And I think it's really hard. But I think the solution is everyone working together. And so maybe if we have more time during this, we can talk more about, what are some things that we can do differently to try to scale this new tech.
Yeah. I think it's all about timelines, right? We know that some technologies are, as Sean was saying, going to take longer to scale. These are things like these clean firm technologies, right? Building out new nuclear reactors or scaling geothermal is not something that's going to happen on the order of 1 to 3 years. That's going to take us into the 2030s and beyond. But I think on those, right, we got to get started today. So if we don't start today, how we're going to get there? So we got to get started today and start to iterate. And then I think one other thing is, how do we foster the ecosystem, right? And how do we bring in more players into the space? Geothermal is a good one, right? We love Fervo. We need them to scale faster, but we need 5 Fervos, right? We need to bring in more geothermal developers into the space, not only in the US, but around the world. And then we also need to bring some of the traditional players and some of the people in the supply chain more actively into the space. Sometimes the limiting factor here is capital. And here's another piece where I think corporate buyers like us can play a role. So an example is, we partnered with Baseload Capital, which is a geothermal developer that has a global portfolio, to bring online projects in Taiwan. That's something we announced earlier this year. But we're not just doing the offtake on that. We're also bringing some capital to bear with an investment. And so sometimes we can also be catalytic in that way.
I'm curious too, for both of you, maybe starting with you again, Lucia, is the sort of the impact that you're seeing of the changing policy landscape in the United States, especially around energy, how that's sort of affecting some of the things that you just were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely not the same kinds of tailwinds we had behind things like renewables that we had a few years ago, right? We're seeing some of that come into play. And what I would say is that creates actually an opportunity for us to really push in the next couple of years these technologies like clean firm technologies that I think have bipartisan support. At the same time, I do think we need to continue to accelerate the build out of our renewables portfolio. We need an all of the above approach when it comes to energy, right? And, in order to, we talked about how some of these clean firm technologies are going to take some time to arrive at scale. We also need to look at what are the solutions that we can scale in the short run. And that means, for example, bringing online technologies that have more mature supply chain options. A good example of that is we partnered with a longer duration energy storage provider called Energy Dome. And one of the things we really like about them is that they leverage pretty mature supply chains. So that's something where plausibly you could run faster, right?
Thanks. And then, Sean, do you want to comment at all on sort of the policy challenges or in general, kind of the uncertainty at that level?
Yeah, well, the feedback that I give new technology providers is don't count on incentives. Be working towards improving the cost of your product to the point where it's competitive, independent of incentives, because it is pretty volatile. But I think that's the goal there. So let's say somebody producing a fuel cell system, to compete with diesel. That would be an enormous advantage, not just for the data center industry, but for transportation and other industries as well. And the only way to get there is to really just continue to drive out cost. These are things like value engineering, pulling out all the features that aren't exactly really needed. These are things like scaling up, being able to build so that you can produce these things at mass manufacturing, so you can bring the cost down there as well. So there's a lot of ways, but yeah, that's the feedback that I give them is try to get to a point where you're competitive, independent of incentives.
And Joe, could you talk more about the innovation that's happening around technology inside the data centers themselves? We've obviously been talking a lot about the energy, the sort of the outside the fence line, but if you could talk more about inside the data centers.
Yeah, it's really interesting because energy efficiency and sustainability, while it has very good optics, to say, oh, look how great my company is, but there's also a lot of really good business drivers for sustainability as well. Every watt that we can save in compute is another watt that that we don't need to build capacity for example. Inside the data center, there's an enormous focus on energy efficiency. I mean, we're talking lots and lots of people and lots of time and money being spent just to shave a few percentage points off of that energy efficiency metric. One of the things that we're seeing emerging is distributing energy with DC power instead of AC power. So if you go to any outlet in your house, that's an alternating current coming out, and it works really well for most things. But when you're coming to something that's very hardcore computing, DC is much more efficient. And so what you're seeing emerging coming out of all of the new OCP is one institution where people can follow where a lot of these are coming from. OCP stands for Open Compute Project, and there's a lot of emphasis around standards on just making that whole energy delivery inside the data center much more efficient. I talked about critical standby, like diesel generators or lithium-ion batteries. What's next? Things that are emission-free, like hydrogen or maybe some new battery. We monitor all the different battery chemistries that are being worked on and being commercialized. One of the things that's very interesting about data centers and energy storage is our needs for long duration carbon-free energy storage match up really well with the energy industry's needs for long duration batteries as well. So if there was some battery that I could buy that was low cost and didn't take up a lot of space and was environmentally friendly, but I could store a few days of energy, I could use that to back up my data center. The energy industry could use that to back up the wind and solar. So there's a lot of really good alignment on innovations inside the data center as well as other industries.
Mm-hmm. And when talking about days worth of storage, that's something that I guess how close is the industry to achieving that? I think of it more in terms of hours, but is it more than that now?
There's a lot of players in this space, right? And I think that's actually one of the challenging things about the energy storage space for us is, I think you can kind of count on your hands the nuclear providers, the geothermal providers, right? You know who the big players are, but there's a lot of innovation happening in this energy storage space, and there's also a lot of different types of technologies, right? And so, but it's absolutely getting there, whether that's in the sort of, let's say, more 8 to 24-hour range, which is the storage solution I mentioned earlier, Energy Dome, or in the 100+ hour range, right? In the sort of form type of a storage system. Both of those are coming along. And I think what's important for us is to start deploying them, piloting them, working very closely. And I think a theme for me is working very closely with the utility players here to pilot, to test, to be able to share out the data and learnings, and then figure out how to scale. But maybe to add to Sean's answer earlier, I think Sean covered a lot of the bases in terms of energy efficiency and behind the meter assets and things like that. But I'll just maybe flesh out a little bit this demand flexibility piece as well, right? I think one of the things that we have been thinking about really hard is demand flexibility, because that is capacity we can unlock today potentially, right? So last year we did a series of pilots with OPBD on during weather events to turn down our demand from ML load in particular. We've been doing this on other types of load previously, right? But we are now in partnership with a couple of utilities, Tennessee Valley Authority, I&M, Indiana, and Michigan Power, to actually bring that demand response directly to the grid.
Just to follow up on demand flexibility, it represents a really good opportunity. I really want to underline this point that there's a lot of capacity on the grid that's already there, built out today. No more power plants need to be built. If only the users could be more flexible, right, and be able to, accept power that's not available all the time. So about 8 years ago, I was involved with a project where we gave our on-site generating assets. I talked about all data centers have generators and have batteries. We gave that to the utility and said, hey, you don't need to build a new power plant to power our data centers. Use our data centers as one of your generating mix, right? And it was another example of this flexibility. So I think there's 3 ways to do it. There's how Lucia is doing it with computational load, being able to adjust that. You can do it with your on-site generating assets. And so those times where the local grid is peaked, let's say way up north, it's very cold, it's the middle of winter, everyone's turning up their heater. The data centers can take a portion of their load and put it onto on-site generating assets. So we can still be able to serve all of our customers real time, and but still be able to take our demand off the grid. And the last one is the energy storage, the batteries. Being able to put large battery systems there, battery energy storage systems that can take a portion of the data center load on when the grid needs it. The only caveat that I'd offer, though, is there has to be a fair exchange of value. Data centers aren't going to do this for fun. We need to have those incentives, the policies. We need to have everything in place that's going to make it a win-win situation for both. And then lastly, the transmission has to be there. So when I'm going to go power a data center and the utility says, I can't do it, it's one of 3 reasons. Or maybe it's 2 or 3 of 3 reasons. It's they don't have enough generating capacity. Okay, no problem. Lucia and I just talked about a way that we can work with you there. Not enough substation capacity, which is really dependent on transformers, which are very hard to get these days. And then lastly, it's the transmission, those wires that you see, overhead going through forests and going through towns. They're delivering the power there. Those are your 3 constraints. So it's not just the energy generation.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's something really powerful, right, in bringing together all of those different elements, behind the meter assets, demand flexibility, and on-site sort of generation, right? All of those things together can form part of the solution.
Well, I know you both obviously have a lot of information and lessons to exchange with each other. So I was wondering if you wanted to pose questions to each other and kind of kick off that discussion.
I really appreciate that question because, a lot of times there's in these things, there isn't a chance for the participants to interact. I think even though Microsoft and Google are competitors and we're both trying to get market share and things like that, my question for Lucia is like, hey, how can we work together to overcome some of these problems that we don't compete at? And I think that sustainability, energy efficiency, clean energy tech. We don't compete in that area. This is a good opportunity, I think, that we could work together. How do you think we could do something like that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, Sean, we've already walked down that path a little bit, right? If you recall last year, Google, Microsoft, and Nucor got together to really send out a joint demand signal for some of these advanced energy technologies. And I think that's maybe the start of what we can do. I think we've all been out there signaling our interest in these technologies and doing our partnerships. But I think collectively, right, that demand signal is what some of these players need in order to start building out a supply chain, et cetera. And that's particularly true in the really large sized assets like nuclear, right? No one's going to do that alone. So we got to be in it together. We can also, collaborate in other ways along the sort of journey to scale, right? I think I would love to see us develop different tools for actually accelerating the deployment on the, what can AI do for energy, right? Develop different tools to actually help accelerate these technologies and their deployment.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have brilliant thoughts, I would love to hear them as well.
Oh, well, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get from technology suppliers that slows them down is, gee, Sean, there's so many different requirements. I got to build a product for Microsoft and a different product for Google, different product for Amazon. You guys could just get together and just try to standardize on some of these requirements. It would really help us. And I think that's an easy one. I think at the end of the day, data center requirements are maybe not 100%, but they're maybe 80%. And this is, I think, we're another area we could work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I also have a question for you, Sean. I'd be curious, you've talked about a lot of really interesting innovation in the sort of data center engineering space. What's most exciting for you? What in the next 5-10 years you think could really change the landscape?
Absolutely. I mean, coming from the Navy, I have seen how a small modular reactor can really just change the game. And I talk to these different companies like Oklo, like, all the different small modular reactor companies out there. And man, wouldn't that be great? Some days a truck pulls up with a big trailer and you plug your data center into it and you get, maybe 10, 20 years of carbon-free baseload energy. That would be outstanding. Until then, I'm actually very excited about long-duration energy storage. This ability that we can, put up, wind turbines and solar panels and be able to balance that with new energy technology that can turn this intermittent power source into a firm 24/7 power source. I think that would be awesome.
I'm with you.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, which, I feel like this could be a days-long discussion. There's so much to talk about here, and so much is changing all the time. But I think that's a great place to wrap up. So thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Sean, for your time. Thanks, SOSV, for bringing us together. And hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yes.